Okay, I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Rattan. I'd just like to welcome everyone back. Hope you had a great summer to the Canadian Concussion Center's webinar series for the fall season, which is again sponsored by the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA. I've just gone back and checked. This is actually our fourth year. Hard to believe we started in March of 2021, sort of mid-pandemic, and we're happy to still be going. So our webinars are designed for individuals that have suffered a concussion, their caregivers, as well as healthcare providers. And if you haven't been with us before, our sessions focus on various aspects of concussion. And typically, we have an expert speaker who speaks for about the first half. And then we open it up to you that are watching, and you can enter your questions and get those answered in the second half. Our sessions are going to be recurring every other Tuesday evening for the fall season. They run Tuesdays from 6 to 7. Um, Before I jump in any further, I'd also like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. Even as we meet virtually, it's important to recognize the lands we each call home and reaffirm our commitment to improving relationships and understanding with local Indigenous peoples. From coast to coast, we honor the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So back to as far as just a few technical things. If you are having any technical difficulties, if you sort of move your cursor, you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a chat. If you have any technical questions, please enter your questions into the chat, and Christian can assist with that. You'll also see a Q&A box and or icon, and you can click on that if you have any questions for our speaker tonight. You can click on that at any point and enter your questions there. Next, we always run just a short poll because it's always helpful for us to know who is out there watching. So I'm just going to ask Christian to pull up the poll and just indicate, we'll give you a second to indicate who you are. Okay, that's great. And just to let you know as well, for those of you that don't know, as I said, we've been running the webinars now for 4 years, and all of our webinars are recorded and archived. So if you are wanting to go back and watch one that you may have missed, you can just go to the Canadian Concussion Center website in the education tab, and you can find all of those there. And for this evening's session, I'm really pleased to welcome back Dr. Charles Tator, who's going to be presenting concussion proofing. Dr. Tator trained in neurosurgery and neuropathology and was chair of neurosurgery at the University of Toronto. He headed neurosurgery at Sunnybrook, Toronto Western Hospital, and University Health Network. He was the founder of Think First Canada, a national brain and spinal cord injury prevention foundation, and Parachute Canada, a national injury prevention agency. He is a scientist in the Krembil Brain Institute. He held 2 research chairs at the University of Toronto and is an officer of the Order of Canada and an inductee of the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame and Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. In 2009, he founded the Canadian Sports Concussion Project and then the Canadian Concussion Centre in 2015, both at the Toronto Western Hospital, University Health Network, specializing in patient care and research in concussion. He is the author of 447, probably more than that now, publications in peer-reviewed journals and books, and is a member of several journal editorial boards. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tator.
Welcome to everyone who's listening and watching. This topic we have not covered previously, And yet it's so important. And it really is prevention. So when we say concussion proofing, we could have said concussion prevention, but like waterproofing to prevent something from getting wet, you can proof yourself against concussion by knowing what to do and also knowing how important it is to prevent another concussion. If you've already had one, and most of the people on this talk tonight will have had one or more. And the message is please try hard to prevent another concussion. And I should add, before we proceed further, that another sponsor for this particular event is McLeish Orlando Personal um, Injury Lawyers. And have been very helpful to us over the years. So we're very pleased to have them as a sponsor for tonight's event and also for Concussion Awareness Week activities that we'll be mentioning to you as we go along. Okay, so that did not work. Let's try this one. Oh, that one works. Terrific. So it's very important to prevent another concussion. In fact, if you are a youngster, let's say less than 30 years of age, it's extremely important for you to prevent another one because there is a condition called second impact syndrome that only occurs in young people less than about 30. And it is what caused the death of Rowan Stringer. And we will be recognizing her during Concussion Awareness Week, but she did have this terrible condition called second impact syndrome where you have one concussion, you recover from it, and then you get another one within a few days, usually, of the first one, and it can cause terrible brain swelling. And sometimes we are not able to intervene effectively in order to prevent uh, serious damage or even death. So it's important at any age not to get another one, but especially if you're a young person less than 30. And the way that people get concussed is so uh, big. In other words, there's so many causes of concussion. Something as simple as hitting your head on a soccer ball can cause a concussion. And so it's not difficult to imagine how many times you're possibly going to hit your head, but most of them are avoidable. This, for example, is a teacher at recess who got struck with a ball, and we just wrote a paper on susceptibility of teachers to concussion, and recess turns out to be quite a danger zone for teachers who can get hit by balls. It's also of special importance for older people to try to prevent another concussion. So if you're over 65, for example, it will take you longer to recover. And it is of interest to realize that a hit to the head is now considered as one of the causes, one of the many known causes for significant memory loss and even dementia as you get older. So it's very important for an older person not to get another one, especially important. Um, and this is a good lesson for people. Notice he is using a cane. We love canes as a way to prevent a fall, especially in an older person. You may have a little weakness of one leg, or you may have, peripheral sensory loss. You may have a little unsteadiness of gait. So canes prevent concussion. If you are a woman, you may or may not know that you concuss more easily than men. And one of the important reasons for that is that in general, women have smaller neck muscles than men. And when you get a concussion, your head does this bobblehead effect very often. For example, if you're in a rear end collision in an automobile, your head is like a bobblehead doll. When your neck muscles are not prepared for it and you get hit unexpectedly, that can cause a concussion. So, and we do know that, for example, if you're a woman hockey player or a woman who's playing basketball, that you concuss more easily than a man. Intimate partner violence, of course, against women is another terrible frequent cause of repetitive concussions in women. And I mentioned the rear end collision already, the bobblehead effect. This is a good reminder that rushing to the bathroom at night is a big risk for concussion. So the tips to prevent this occurrence is, uh, be aware that rushing to the bathroom at night, especially, is a big problem. And if there's a loose mat on the floor, or if the toilet is on another floor from your bedroom, or if it's dark and you haven't turned the light on, or you haven't got time, you think, to pick up your cane or put on your glasses. So older people do have all of these additional risks. Climbing a ladder when you're over the age of 65 or 70 is a no-no, in my view. And surprisingly, even putting on your pants in the morning can cause a concussion. So learn to lean against a wall or lean against a door to try to prevent another concussion. And look at the risk on this uh, um, photo. You see that loose mat on the floor? For sure, he's going to trip on that loose mat and fall and get a concussion. So no loose mats in your way. And look at this old guy who's on a ladder and trying to get something fitted into his storage bin, and it's just, an accident waiting to happen. Rough sidewalks need to be flagged. We have seen a lot of people concussed from that. Walking the dog. We love to walk the dog, but you have to do it with care. You can't trip on the dog. You shouldn't walk on the dog. The streets may be wet or icy or snowy. Don't forget your glasses or your cane or your walker when you're out. Don't carry too many parcels. Carrying too many parcels and purses, or carrying too many parcels, purses, and briefcases, all of those are added hazards and can cause falls with concussion. We've already mentioned about sports, a whole range of activities that can cause concussion. But in hockey, for example, it's body checking. So, do you need to join a contact hockey league? Why don't you join a non-contact hockey league? We've already talked about teachers who have to be especially careful at recess, but against thrown or kicked balls. Taxi drivers and anybody who's a passenger in any automobile that's involved in a collision. Concussions are very common in collisions, especially in women and especially rear end collisions. And seat belts and airbags provide marvelous protection when we are passengers in automobiles. But unfortunately, there are some shortcomings about current design, and that's something we're trying to fix, in fact. And we've really questioned the car manufacturers and the engineers about why airbags do not deploy on rear end collisions. They're purposely not supposed to go off on a rear end collision and be available for front end collisions or even side collisions, but not rear end collisions. And we want to change that. Bicyclists need to wear a helmet, need to avoid potholes. Try avoiding mountain biking when you're older, especially streetcar tracks or getting doored because you're not watching somebody getting out of a car that's parked. All of those are hazards for bicyclists, hazards of getting a concussion. And as I mentioned, all kinds of sports, even getting hit with a soccer ball can cause a concussion. And this teacher at recess getting hit with a ball is a hazard. Or if you're a parent and not looking, it's a hazard. We mentioned rear end collisions or front end collisions and the number of people who get concussed in that way. So graphically, there's a lot of encouragement to avoid those um, hazardous situations. Construction workers, painters, people who are on ladders, especially in older houses where the basement isn't as high as you would like it. And if you're a tall construction worker, that's a real risk for you working in a basement. Roofers without a harness. And if you're in the military, you're subject to blast injury, which has almost the same effect as concussion. Skiers and snowboarders on icy slopes without a helmet. Those are hazards. Now, helmets are quite wonderful for preventing more severe brain injuries than concussion. There's really no proof that a helmet will prevent a concussion, but it will prevent the more serious brain blows that cause bleeding or tearing even of the brain. Some people say that mouth guards do prevent concussion. I'm not sure about it, but they definitely prevent teeth damage and maybe fractured jaws as well. I don't think we should just accept the idea that concussions are just part of the game in games like soccer and football and hockey. They are preventable. For example, a punch to the head. You know, some announcers just think of them as harmless crowd pleasers, but that's not true because, in fact, I know of two hockey players who have died from fights on the ice, Brad Masterton and Don Sanderson, more recently. So it can happen. So fighting is not just to be condoned. Um, Look how well protected these guys are, but they can still get a concussion if they're crashed into the boards from behind. So hockey is a high risk sport for concussion, no doubt. Boxing, of course, is a terribly high risk sport, and boxing has resulted in deaths, both in men and women. Recently, there was an 18-year-old female. I see I've got a mistake on this slide. Not an 8-year-old female boxer, but an 18-year-old female boxer who died in Montreal 2 years ago or so, most likely from a second impact syndrome because she had had a previous knockout 1 or 2 months before the final fatal blow. Um, a lot of strategies have come from experts in public health, and governments have actually behaved well in terms of trying to prevent concussion. So governments have done some good things for concussion proofing. For example, in Ontario, we were one of the first to institute a Ministry of Education memorandum about teaching in schools about the hazards of concussions. How do you get a concussion? How do you avoid a concussion? And since about 2015, that has spread to almost all provinces in the country. In the USA, by about 2014, all states had passed concussion laws. You may be surprised that there are laws about concussion, especially sports concussions. And it happened first in Seattle, Washington, with a youngster whose name was Zachary Lystedt, who at about age 14 in Seattle, Washington, got a concussion early in the game. And then later in the same game, he had another major blow to the brain, and he did survive, but not well. He has significant neurological deficits. And then a few years later in Ottawa in 2017, Rowan Stringer, a 17-year-old high school student who was captain of her high school rugby team, actually died of second impact syndrome due to multiple concussions over a short period of time, which she did not report to her parents. She did not tell her teachers. She did not tell her coaches. She did tell her friends. And it took an inquest to sort this out. And that was really what led to Ontario developing concussion laws and to many other provinces developing concussion prevention programs. And this slide just chronicles that, where the issue has been helped by public policy and laws against concussion. And so since about 2007, actually that should be 2017, we've had good public health measures in Canada um, against concussions, trying to teach about concussions in the schools and trying to make sure that our populations are well managed who have concussion. So good for Ontario and good for the rest of the country that have followed with school-based concussion programs. But Ontario is still the only province with a concussion law. So we hope to see that change. And this is a picture of Rowan Stringer, the one we talked about. Um, and and her story is known well by all school children in Ontario because of Rowan's Law Day, which in fact is coming up next week. We're having Concussion Awareness Week, and right in the middle of the week on the Wednesday in Ontario, it's called Rowan's Law Day. And she died because of second impact syndrome, this problem of serious brain swelling that can seldom be turned around by even rapid neurosurgical decompression of the brain, which happened in her case. She was treated expeditiously by the ambulance crew that picked her up, by the team in the hospital at CHEO in Ottawa, which tried to help her, but she eventually succumbed to this catastrophic injury, which is completely preventable, as I've written here, by preventing the second hit. And you may ask yourself, what is Rowan's Law? Well, it is the legislation plus the regulations that have been associated with the legislation. In fact, we still have some of the regulations that are being rolled out. For example, it used to be that only those in elementary and public schools were subject to Rowan's Law. But more recently, a year or so ago, the Ministry of Education and Sport and Health got together and decided that it should cover university students as well. So, in fact, every student in a school environment in Ontario is now subject to Rowan's Law, and it is making a difference. And these are posters that are posted in our schools right across Ontario. So it's really a very well designed, thought out program by public health and by the government of Ontario. And it really is interesting that the current minister of travel and sport is Minister Neil Lumsden, who is a real advocate for safe sports. And in fact, recently, he himself willed his brain to our project, where after you're through with it, we do want to try to sort out who's going to get CTE, for example. That's still a mystery that has to be solved. And the minister has agreed that he's going to help solve that. So that's really admirable. And the message for young people is stop playing if you got a bad hit to the head. Tell an adult if there are no adults around. Go home and tell your parents, which Rowan didn't do. Tell the coach, tell the teacher, get checked by a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner. I mean, those are the two healthcare professionals that are allowed to diagnose concussion, although other healthcare professionals can certainly suspect it. But if you think you've had a concussion, you should be checked by a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner. Um, we do want concussion laws to be in every province. So this refers to a paper that was written by a lawyer and myself. Um, and the lawyer is one of the Moore brothers who have had their share of concussion problems. And this advocates for safety and laws in all Canadian provinces. And we did already allude to the fact that this coming week, from September 22 to 28, is a concussion awareness week in Canada through the Coaching Association of Canada. The idea of having an awareness week was instituted about 5 years ago. And in the middle of that week, Ontario celebrates Rowan's Law Day. And a lot of this is supervised and organized by Parachute Canada, a national injury prevention agency that we are connected with and are eager to see this continued. So improved awareness and recognition do lead to prevention. We have a lot of information on our website about concussion prevention. And so I'm hoping that you will brush up on that. And as I mentioned, our sponsor for the event this evening is Liuna, which has sponsored our whole series for the past 4 years. And this particular night has also been um, uh, sponsored by McLeish Orlando Personal Injury Lawyers. And we appreciate that sponsorship. And I'm available to answer any questions that you have, not only about prevention and awareness and laws, but also any other concussion question that you might have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tatter. That was really interesting. I just a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter those into the Q&A. We do have a question from Mark, and he is asking about, he's saying, what about neck strengthening as a risk mitigation strategy?
Oh, fantastic. I missed stating that. Thank you for the reminder. That is extremely important as an injury prevention measure. Neck muscle strengthening, especially if you're a woman, but men as well. We tend not to strengthen our neck muscles like all the weights that you lift, and uh, they don't really do much for your neck. So, the excellent exercises are isometric neck muscle strengthening. I'm not really in favor of doing range of motion. So, and this is what we mean by range of motion, where the therapist tells you, well, we want to make your neck healthy by uh, restoring any movement that you may have lost. But I think for prevention of concussion, isometric neck muscle strengthening is important. And here's how you do it. Here's the quick way to do it. You take your own hand and you put it on one side of your head and you count to five. So one, and then you push your head into your hand. So one, two, three, four, five. And then you put your hand on the front and push. And notice I'm not moving my head, so I'm not doing any damage to any of the joints. I'm just strengthening the muscles that run up and down. And then you put your hand on the other side of your head and you push. One, two, three, four, five. And then you put your hand at the back of your head. And again, you push one, two, three, four, five. And then you start all over again. And by your watch or by the clock, you do it for 10 minutes. That's a long time. And then that's every morning. And then again, every evening, you do it for another 10 minutes. Now, 10 minutes may be too long at the beginning. You may only want to do it for 5 minutes. If your neck starts to hurt, only do it for 5 minutes. But notice I'm not whirling my head around. After a concussion, that often is not well tolerated if you move your head like this. But doing isometric, isometric means you don't lengthen or shorten the neck muscles. Like when I do this, I'm lengthening the muscle, the muscles are shortening others. Again, lengthening and shortening, lengthening and shortening. That lengthening and shortening isn't the best way to strengthen the muscles. The best way without bringing on other symptoms is to do it isometrically. And in fact, I advise people to do it in front of a mirror so that you can be sure that you're not moving you're not shortening or lengthening the muscles. That's the safest way to prevent another concussion by through strengthening of muscles. It's time honored, it works, it won't cause any trouble, and it will really prevent another concussion.
Hmm, that's great. And we actually just had a comment about that from Steve saying, I actually do this to help my migraines and indicating the pressure actually feels good. So there you go.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Deborah's asking, are there any known risk factors for second impact syndrome?
Youth is a risk factor that you
Mm,
can't do anything about. Um, and repetitive hits in short interval. So, for example, when you think of Rowan Stringer, and the amazing thing about the coroner's system, I want to just mention this because you know, coroners, it's not a great job to have to deal with people who have passed on all the time, but it's so important to figure out how to prevent injury. And that's what we do. We build on the knowledge that they give us about how people do hurt themselves. And so we really are grateful to the coroners for pointing this out. What was the question about that?
Yeah, just the risk factors for second impact syndrome.
So in in Rowan Stringer's case, we know because of the coroners who were very careful in in finding all the information about this, that she had her first concussion on a Friday. The following week, on Monday, she had a second concussion. Both of those were in school rugby games. And then on the Wednesday, so Friday and then the Monday and then Wednesday, so 2 to 3 days apart, she had a third massive brain injury when she was upended by another player and fell on her head and had the final fatal injury. And even though she was retrieved expeditiously and operated on, it didn't save her life. So the interval, and fortunately, this issue of second impact syndrome is rare. I've only seen a few people. We actually have a study underway to try to document exactly how rare it is, but it is definitely rare. We're not seeing it every week, for example, in Canada. Maybe there are two or three a year, but they are
Mm.
completely preventable. And they can occur under any circumstances that cause repetitive concussion. Sports being, one of the most common venues in which you can get repetitive concussion.
Mhm.
The oldest player on record who died of second impact syndrome was 32. So nobody in their
Mm.
40s, 50s, 60s. And that is because the young brain swells like a balloon after repetitive trauma. And that just doesn't happen with the older brain. It's one of the
Mm.
few good things about getting older. You're not going to get second impact syndrome.
Okay, good to know. Rebecca is asking, what is your opinion of the MIPS bike helmets that are supposed to help with reducing concussion risk? I hadn't heard of them, but it's the multi-directional impact protection system.
Yeah, I do know about that helmet. I think it is a good helmet. I'm not sure that it's better than those without the MIP mechanism. Um, but helmets do prevent brain injuries more serious than concussion. There is no evidence that helmets prevent concussion. Otherwise, we wouldn't see it in hockey or football. There'd be, no concussions if helmets prevented concussion, but unfortunately, they do not. The nearest thing is what the NFL is trying to explore, and that is the value of the Guardian helmet that makes players look like marshmallows. The big enveloping soft covering of a regular helmet with this Guardian helmet. It's really being experimented with to see if it will help, but I don't think there is any evidence yet that it really does help, especially in games. There's a little bit of evidence that it seems to help in practices. And certainly the NFL is spending a lot of money in trying to evaluate its safety. Yeah.
Hmm, interesting. And I just read, I was going to ask a question myself, just speaking of the NFL. I understand that they banned smelling salts just in August.
So that is
Is
interesting.
that
I
true?
didn't know that. I
I just saw it and I was curious because it made me think, what exactly do the smelling salts do to, I guess, mask the symptoms?
That is interesting. It may be that they do mask symptoms because they stimulate the brain. Because smelling
Mm,
salts were used traditionally to hasten the return to consciousness of someone who was knocked out. So they
mm,
do something to rouse the brain, uh, but I don't see that they're a treatment for concussion. I don't see that they prevent concussion.
yeah. Thank you. Michelle is asking, does the higher number of concussions you've had increase your risk of getting dementia?
Well, that is a big question mark. It's an excellent question. And that is one of the reasons why the Canadian Concussion Center went into business studying concussions, because not only do we try to help people recover from concussions, but we are in a major way trying to discover how to prevent them and how to prevent some of the complications of concussions like that you're referring to, which is CTE. So CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It was given different names in different eras. It's not a new condition. It used to be called the punch drunk syndrome, which is an unnecessary negative pejorative term, because those people were not drunk, but they were suffering from unsteadiness of gait because their brains were damaged due to repetitive concussions. And so now we've made that connection because after many concussions, you really are imbalanced and unsteady, and it may not recover to normal. And the same issue is dementia. How many concussions lead to memory loss and irreversible changes in the brain that result in things like Alzheimer's disease? Um, so in our center, we are, very engaged in trying to sort this out. We've been at it for almost 15 years now. And we are closer, especially Dr. Carmela Tartaglia, who has major research projects underway on trying to sort out how to prevent the long-term complications of multiple concussions. Concussions are now on the list for dementia. So there's no question that some people, after multiple concussions, end up with Alzheimer's disease, with what looks like Alzheimer's disease. So it may be chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or it may be Alzheimer's disease. And, that is one of the major research projects. We have made gains Um, but it has been a lot slower than we anticipated. There is still no um, uh, indicator of what the clinical manifestations of it are. We can recognize it at autopsy, the ability to say if there is CTE in a brain has improved dramatically over the past 10 years. So now there's, no doubt about when we examine the brain after death, we can tell. But unfortunately, we can't tell during life. That has still not been possible. So that there's no imaging test, there's no blood test, there's no clinical test that is proven to predict if it is chronic traumatic encephalopathy that is the reason for losing memory or any of the other functions of the brain that are affected by repetitive trauma. But I can tell you that very major uh, symposia have been held that have confirmed that trauma is one of the antecedent factors for several types of memory loss. Just like heart disease is, and arteriosclerosis and diabetes. So there are about 12 or so, or 15 or so recognized risk factors for dementia. And now trauma has been added to the list.
Mhm. Great. Thank you very much. Andrea is asking, if you have a previous brain injury from decades ago, can it make it harder for you to recover from a new concussion?
Yes, it can. We have good evidence that your brain does retain the memory, even if you've made a great recovery from a concussion. Your next concussion will be worse than the first concussion because of that retained whatever it is that stays with you, even though you make an excellent recovery, even though you make a complete clinical recovery. And most people after one concussion recover to normal. We can If you have a concussion and it's your first, and you are treated well, you make a great recovery, we wouldn't know it. We wouldn't know that you've had a previous concussion. We can't tell when we examine you. We can't tell when we look at an MRI or a CAT scan of your brain that you've had a concussion. We can't do a blood test to determine if you had a concussion. And so you can recover well from a concussion, but yet that susceptibility to the next one will be with you forever.
Great. Thank you. We have a question just asking for your thoughts on hyperbaric oxygen therapy for concussion.
That's a good question. We were hopeful that it was going to help. It certainly was tested thoroughly in several centers, and there still is, I think, availability of hyperbaric oxygen somewhere in Toronto, but a couple of them have already closed down that opened up because there's not good evidence that it helps. For example, we do not recommend it. It's probably harmless to the brain. So if you do it, it's not going to harm you. It could harm your ears. It could do something to your hearing or balance, but it isn't going to make the concussion worse. But there's not good evidence that it helps.
Okay, thank you. Jim is asking, should a person that has post-concussion symptoms for over 5 years, so lengthy symptoms, um, limit their mental exercises? For example, sounds like they're a guitar player, practicing the guitar X number of hours and instead do more things that are physical, like gardening.
Um, that's a good way to think about how to do the best for your brain. Um, my advice is do both. There's no reason to give up mental activities. There's no evidence that you are going to worsen your long-term uh, well-being by doing lots of mental things, arithmetic or accounting or legal work or whatever you like to do that requires intense concentration. Once you've recovered from the concussion, there's no evidence that you should alter your mental activities. And now, with respect to physical activities, we have seen good evidence that physical activities help recovery. There were quite a few doubters originally when this was initially looked at maybe 15 years ago, but over the past 15 years, evidence upon evidence upon evidence has accumulated to support daily physical activity. And it has to be of the aerobic type. If you like to lift weights, go ahead and lift them. But there's no evidence that weight lifting helps the brain. I think, really strenuous weightlifting drives too much blood into the brain and may give you a headache, for example, after a concussion. But lifting heavy weights as a measure of keeping your brain healthy or as a measure of helping you recover from a concussion doesn't work. But aerobic activity works. And the current prescription that we recommend in our center is that you should do about 30 minutes a day. You can't do that right away, but you should work up to about 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week. 7 days a week. So physical activity for recovery of concussion is very definite, but you have to do it every day. You can't just do it for 5 minutes. Um, and the evidence is there that it helps.
Great, thank you. And just in follow-up to that, I think this is Jim as well asking about after a concussion, is it common to get worse years after your concussion?
No, usually there isn't worsening. Like we have shown that not everybody gets all better. Some people do get all better, and just like they never had a concussion, especially younger people. Younger people recover better from concussion. But there's no evidence that you're going to be at a disadvantage ultimately, and there's no evidence that there is worsening unless you've had multiple concussions. And as you get older, conditions like CTE do appear. So that is what we call an aftermath or a sequela of usually repetitive concussions, like hockey players who have had 10 or 15. It's usually a large number of concussions that leads to late deterioration like CTE.
Okay, great. Okay, this is great, really great questions here. Um, Do you know if Ontario's private schools have adopted Rowan's law and recommendations?
That's a really good question. My rough answer is yes. They weren't ordered to do it originally, but I think that the private schools have jumped on this program of Rowan's Law, even though the Ministry of Education doesn't have the same authority over them as the public school. But my information is that in fact, they are adhering to the principles of Rowan's Law.
Excellent. Um, okay, here's a good one. Can concussions be caused by something small, like tripping on an uneven sidewalk, but not falling, just getting a bit of a shake during a stumble once one has already had um, post-concussion syndrome, or I guess has had persisting symptoms?
The answer is yes. We know that your head doesn't have to impact on anything to get a concussion. If it gets a violent shake, then that is enough in some people to cause a concussion. And perhaps the best example is a blast injury. There isn't anything but a wave of energy that hits the brain in a blast injury, and yet it causes something like a concussion if you're in the military. So your head does not have to hit anything as long as it moves violently enough to cause sufficient acceleration. The uh, engineers have helped us enormously in assessing this type of question, sort of the biomechanical underpinning of concussion. What is it about movement that creates concussion? And the best example is motor vehicle crashes where uh, the driver, for example, may be struck from behind, so he doesn't see it coming. And then the head goes back first. If you're hit from behind, the energy turns your head back, and then you go forward. And you can go forward pretty violently and strike nothing. If the seatbelt is taut, you may strike nothing. And just that violent movement forward of the head without striking anything can lead to concussion. And that's why we are arguing against the engineers who have advised car companies that they don't need to deploy the airbags in a rear end collision. There aren't even sensors in most cars in the rear of the car. All the sensors
Mm.
for airbag deployment are in the front of the car. So you have a front end collision, and generally, if it's of sufficient magnitude, the steering wheel airbag inflates, the curtain airbags inflate, and you're held in place so that you don't bobble around. That doesn't happen on a rear end collision. And so
Mhm.
we think that's a mistake, but time will tell whether we're right or the engineers are right. But at any rate, you don't have to hit your head. Now, if you do hit your head, then it's even worse. But you don't have to hit your head to cause a concussion.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm aware that we're almost at time, but I'm going to try and squeeze in just a few more questions. Paul is asking, a teen sustains a concussion in rugby. He feels better within 3 days. He follows the Parachute Canada guideline. When is it safe to return to rugby, understanding that second impact syndrome remains a risk for a while?
Great question. Um, Off the top of my head, I would say never return within a week. I think that is too fast for the brain to fully recover from a concussion. Now, young people, like a 16-year-old, for example, not a 4-year-old. 4-year-olds can take a long time to recover, but let's say a teenager recovers quite quickly in most cases from a first concussion. As the number goes up, as the number of concussion goes up, the length of recovery goes up as well. The length of time it takes to recover goes up. But I think the earliest, in my view, should be 7 to 10 days. If you've completely recovered it, 3 days, I don't think you should go back.
Okay.
But 7 to 10 days, I think you should be checked, though. You should be put through some maneuvers to prove that you have recovered. For example, in my office, I do what's called the rapid turning test, and that brings out symptoms that aren't there if you're just strolling along the street. So if you turn suddenly, your brain is accelerated inside your head, and that can induce concussion symptoms. So provocative tests should be done, especially with athletes, to make sure that they have completely recovered before they go back into action. Uh, as you know, if you're a football fan, the NFL has gone to great lengths to try to study concussions. In fact, we have an annual research symposium, and we have invited the chief concussion doctors from the NFL on 2 occasions. And it is illuminating to see what steps they have taken to try to figure out a lot of these issues in relationship to football. So hats off to the football crowd for trying to deal with the problem accurately. And we've actually learned quite a bit from them about early management of concussion, early recognition, early management. So they have done a good job.
That's great. And Tim has just typed in the chat. He said there's actually some newer guidelines very close to what you recommended. Newer guidelines in rugby is apparently now recommending 2 weeks without return to play. So,
Rugby is starting to, come around to, you know, think of concussions seriously. There are a lot of concussions in rugby, and probably they can prevent more and be as careful as other sports have become.
excellent. Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question. Thank you so much, everybody's. We've got a lot tonight. Are there new drugs now recommended to help resolve a concussion?
That's also a great question. You know, um, we do have a couple of favorite drugs to counteract specific symptoms of concussion. We can dampen down specific symptoms. For example, we can dampen down headaches. We do a pretty good job with headaches with certain drugs. Very often, they require a fair amount of trial and error to get the right drug. And in fact, we often send concussed people to concussion, uh, to neurologists who specialize in headaches. So there are neurologists now who specialize in headaches, and they help us with some of the difficult concussion patients. For example, if you have migraine, plus you then go on and get repetitive concussions, that's a special problem. for us. And we would definitely refer those patients to a headache neurologist. So, yes, there are some very good drugs that we can use to prevent headaches. We would rather prevent a headache than treat a headache. And there are quite a few good preventive drugs. I like the drug called amitriptyline because it not only prevents headaches, but it helps with sleep. Sleep deprivation on top of headaches is terrible for people. So we really try to make people have a refreshing sleep. Your brain needs a refreshing sleep after a concussion. And this particular drug, amitriptyline, that I happen to like a lot because it has helped a lot of people, it not only improves sleep, so it has like a sedative effect at sleep, um, but it prevents tomorrow's headache. So you don't take this drug if you have a headache. It acts to prevent a headache. And there are a range of drugs, especially if there are migraine features to post-concussion headaches, which there often are, then drugs that have been effective for migraine can be very helpful to those with this type of headache who've had a concussion.
Great. Okay, I know we're over time. There's still a fair number of people. Are you okay to answer a couple more?
Two more.
Okay, okay. Do adult boxers suffer second impact syndrome?
That is a good question. You know, this 18-year-old in Montreal a couple of years ago is a more typical age for second impact syndrome. The oldest on record is a 32 or 34, I've forgotten, year old hockey player, definitely in their 30s, who died of second impact syndrome. It just doesn't occur in older people. What was the question again?
Whether in adult boxers, whether you ever see second impact
Um,
syndrome or yeah, so it didn't specify an age, but
I would say until until their 30s, they're still going to be subject to it. But there's a real individual variation. Like for example, a bus full of people that get struck from behind, everybody goes back first and then you go back first and then forward. How many on that bus, if it's full of people, are going to be concussed? Not everybody. So
mhm,
there's a huge individual variation. Some boxers can get away with taking more hits to the head than the average person. Otherwise, they wouldn't have continued to box because they all get hit to the head perpetually. When I was a kid and I got hit to the head, it gave me a headache
yeah,
immediately because, there's migraine in my family. So headaches for my family were something that was there. Um, so this individual variation, sure, there's going to be boxers who could take 10 hits to the head and won't get concussed. And there will be others who can only take one or two before they get concussed.
okay, okay, thank you. And one last one. Can concussion raise your blood pressure?
Not routinely. I don't think there's much evidence for that. It does cause a lot of autonomic effects. In other words, there's a voluntary motor system like moving your hands, and so that's voluntary. And then there's an involuntary system that controls things like heartbeat and pulse and constriction of blood vessels. Um, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I have the answer.
Mhm.
I'll look it up for you.
Okay. Thank you so much, and apologies for going overtime for people that had to miss any of it. Of course, this is all recorded and will go up on the website. Thank you so much for all the great questions, and thanks so much, Dr. Tatter, for your time and your great presentation and response to all of those questions. Just a reminder, our next session is September 30th in 2 weeks. We're going to have Dr. Carmela Tartaglia presenting concussion, an invisible brain injury with consequences. And what am I forgetting? You'll also be receiving a short survey. So if you have just a couple minutes to fill that out, we always love to hear from you and get your feedback. Hope everyone has a great evening. And thank you, Christian, for all your help tonight.